Thank you, Steve. I'd like to invite the panelists to come on up and have a seat. Kawika, Ulalia, Jessica, and Steve, please. And while everyone gets settled, I just wanted to thank you all again for attending today. My name is Allison Bidlack. I am with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, although I live in Juneau, Alaska, and I am part of the leadership team of the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I've been involved with this PI-CASC collaboration, as we call it, for about 4 or 5 years now. So today we've got a great panel here. I'm going to have the 4 panelists introduce themselves, just give a quick introduction, your name and where you're from, and then we're going to jump right into some questions. Kawika has to leave in about 15 minutes, and so I'll probably lead off with one question, and then I'll open it up to the audience as well. And so, Kawika, would you mind starting off? Thank you.
Aloha, Kawika Winter, Director of the National Estuarine Research Reserve here in Hawaiʻi.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Garron. I'm the daughter of Larry and Nadine from Columbus, Ohio. I'm the wife of Jason from Fairbanks, Alaska, and the mother of Burnley and Athena. I live and work on the traditional lands of the Lower Tanana Dene people, and my research partners are the Yupik people of Western Alaska. I also am a research professor at the International Arctic Research Center and the Deputy Director of the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. And this is my first trip to Hawaii.
Hello again. So if I haven't met yet, Steve Gray from USGS and the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center.
Aloha mai kākou, o wau o Ulalia Woodside Lee, no Hawaiʻi mai au, no hoau ma Waimanalo, ma ka moku o Koʻolau Poko, ma keia mokupuni o Ahu. Velina me ke aloha, I'm Ulalia Woodside Lee. I'm from this place, born and raised, and live in Waimanalo on the windward side of this island, and I'm very honored to lead the Nature Conservancy's Hawaii and Palmyra program, where we've been working here in Hawaii for about over 40 years, focusing on the vital foundational life-giving elements of this island that are found in our traditional chants, starting with our reefs and healthy nearshore reefs and fisheries and fresh water, the deities of the fresh water and the native forests that are the source for those waters. So Velina, thank you for being here.
So I'd like to start off. It's been interesting listening to the talks yesterday and today, and I've been struck by both the similarities and differences between Hawaii and Alaska, and particularly by the similarities. It's really, really interesting to hear the challenges that you all are dealing with and how amazingly similar to ours in Alaska. I'm also struck by the similarities in the connection to land. The Hawaiian term is aina, and the Tlingit word where I come from is ani. And so, you know, although I grew up in Chicago, Southeast Alaska is now my ani. It is where I belong. It is the place I fell in love with back in 1997 when I first went there. And so my first question for the panel, and Kawika in particular, because Kawika has to leave soon, is for those of us from a Western culture and from a science culture in particular, I mean, the talks we just heard, they're great talks, but they're so different from some of the talks we heard yesterday. It's jargon, it's numbers, it's graphs. It's not about people, it's about numbers. And so my question is, as a white Western scientist, what can I do? What can the Western science community do to better uphold, to support Indigenous-led ecosystem or watershed conservation and management efforts?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And, you know, I spoke in my presentation about Indigenous science, and I think understanding that science is a bigger thing than we're often taught about it. I think, you know, I'm mostly off social media nowadays, but I saw a post last year, some British scientist had, somebody was putting around a quote of him, and it said, "We're scientists, we measure things." And I was thinking, really? That's what makes a scientist, somebody who measures things? Because to me, science is a process of building knowledge. It starts with observations, and then it leads into questions, and then it leads into, oh, what happens if you tinker around with this and play with this? What happens there? And then whatever you learn from that process goes to inform your knowledge system. To me, that's what science is. And measuring and analyzing data, to me, in the grand scheme of things, that's a very small part of the process. But I think university science has elevated that aspect, that small aspect of science, to be the biggest aspect of science. And I think from an Indigenous perspective, that's not the biggest side. And I think we have some speakers maybe in the next session who will be speaking about Native Hawaiian perspectives of science. Yeah, I think to just more in a straightforward way answer your question, science is more than just measuring things. And how do you, and part of it is, you know, the more conventional approaches to science tends to see science or nature and humanity as something different. And so you extract them and you separate them out and measure these little parts of it. And Indigenous approaches to science usually honors the relationships and understands the dynamics of those relationships. And, you know, there's not one side is more appropriate or less appropriate, or one side is better or worse. It's just, there are two different ways to do it. And I think when we can engage in collaborative relationships between Indigenous science and conventional science, we can answer questions more holistically and communicate them in a way that's better received sometimes by the general public. Thank you.
As a white woman scientist, I can say that what I have done is learn to check my ego. And that's a challenge for a woman in science and geophysics, because to check your ego, you need to sit and listen. And I spent a lot of time in Alaskan communities, and I'm silent. I have learned to keep my mouth completely shut and just learn from my elders, learn from my neighbors. And that's part of my observational science. I've been a scientist for 25 years doing observational science in biology to remote sensing from space. But observational science starts also with listening to your partners and your neighbors. And that doesn't work well in an academic setting, you get stepped on. So it's an interesting balance, and one that I invite all white scientists to practice listening. Another thing that we Western trained scientists can do is to practice co-learning and co-production of science with our neighbors. We're all living here together in the same spaces. So identifying our questions together and seeking solutions together, whether or not you call it co-production or co-learning, is one of the methodologies for integrating broader perspectives into the way we do science and the way we teach science to be done in the future.
I'll jump in and add a little bit from this place, and that is an olelo no'eau, or a traditional proverb of this place is "Nawai ho'i ka ole o ke akamai ma'a I ka hele ia e umau makua." What that means is, who would deny the knowledge, that well-worn knowledge of my parents who came before me? And as we go forward and we think about places and we plan for places, why would we deny hundreds of years of knowledge and wisdom of place? So I think, you know, coming into a space and knowing that and recognizing that there's lots of wisdom and knowledge there. I would say that there's a lot of tools out there nowadays. Lots of agencies have guidelines and packets and a network of communities here in Hawaii. The Maui Nui Makai Network put together a kind of a great framework that I think helps set folks up really well. It's called the Malama Ike Kai Community Action Guide. So I would encourage, you know, scientists to take a look at that. Start by thinking about that place and the people, acknowledging that place and the people and the stewards of that place. And so getting to know those and those action guides. And the last thing, talking with some of my colleagues scientist colleagues that work in this space, is the concept of do no harm. And as we think about what we're working on and what we're doing, is to sit with that for a while and sit with that concept of do no harm. So those are a couple of kind of more recent mana'o and as well as old mana'o in terms of coming into that space of sharing and growing knowledge together.
Mahalo for those thoughts. I don't want to hog the questions here. Are there any questions that the audience might have for our panel?
Hello, everybody. Kapono Garan in RIM. The community-based initiatives, especially Dr. Winter spoke about, interest me, and I think that they're really valuable. And I also have a question about kind of the backlash portion that you were alluding to a little bit. The gist of my question is, with the rise of community-based management, monitoring these types of things, there seems to be a rise of certain stakeholder groups pushing back against that, more marginalized ones that see, especially management organizations, maybe being an issue instead of a solution. So I wonder if you could all speak a little bit about what approaches might be out there to bridge this information in a way that is accepted and integrated into a community and not seen as the outsider trying to fix something, or how do you instill that community-based, if these only work when the community want it, how do you get the community to want it?
I don't think you get the community to want anything. It's a valid question, and I'm not quite sure which challenge you're alluding to that you mentioned, but co-management is tough because it takes trust. It takes trust between communities and government. And a lot of times nowadays, there is very little to no trust there. So part of our challenges in the co-management efforts I've been involved in, both in Ha'ena and Hei'ia and elsewhere, is that both sides of it, the community and government, there's enough distrust on both sides that they think the other one is trying to get more than they already have, which is too much. So on the government side, there are some people who have a tendency to not want to relinquish that power and authority that they already have. And on the community side, there is mistrust in the sense that, oh, this is just an excuse for the government to take more away from us. Every time the government's been involved in our community, we've lost something. We've lost rights, we've lost our language, we've lost our connections to our place, so on and so forth. We lost our life ways. So to get over those hurdles of building trust takes time. The Ha'ena initiative didn't get formalized until 2015. It started in 1992. It took literally 2 generations. We lost elders in the process. Babies were born in the process. My daughter was a baby. I was holding her doing community meetings. She almost graduated high school by the time we actually got this done. So I don't know if there's any magic silver bullets out there, but just understanding that there is mistrust and just like everything else, it's relational, it's reciprocal. It takes giving and not just, okay, what can I get out of this kind of thing. And so when you can get enough people on the community side and enough people on the government side to commit to that and work through it, then there's some hope. But I mean, it's never, I haven't seen an example where it's been easy and all that stuff. It's challenging, but you know, when we take what the elders have given us is this idea, and you know, they pass on, and before that it comes to fruition, it's kind of given to us, like, see this through. And so we do that for them, to honor them, but also for the benefit of our children and unborn grandchildren. So we've had some success there. So hopefully that answered your question. But I do need to step off to my committee meeting, so I'll pass it off from there. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Kawika. Oh, sorry, was you gonna jump in?
Go ahead.
Mahalo, Kawika.
Thank you, Kawika.
I just want to build on that trust. And one of the challenges usually is a time frame. Usually the research season is a challenge, or the funding season time frame is usually a challenge in order to get this done. Because you know, I'm not the one to have said this. Lots of folks have said, you know, things in this realm move at the speed of trust. And I think my ear picked up on something, and when you said, how do we get the community, I think, to want what is needed? I think if we already have an idea of what's needed, we're kind of starting on the wrong foot. We're not kind of starting, don't water it down. We're on the wrong foot. If we know what needs to be done and we're trying to convince somebody, then that's not community co-management. It's not even community-based management. And we'll be, you know, always trying to justify, catch up, being on the defense, being in a position of being mistrusted. It's about that desire to want to learn together and understand together, and learn what's happening in that community, and what are those challenges of that place and of that people, and how we might learn and see if there is a question that we might be able to tackle together. Lots of mights you might hear in my words, lots of sort of disclaimers type of language. That's intentional, because I think coming into that space humbly and without already knowing what the community should want would be the first step. I'm going to try and do a really quick, you know, Kawika shared about Ha'ena. There's another community on Hawaiʻi Island, Ka'upulehu, more than 20 years of trust building, community building, knowledge sharing across the Pacific. It started maybe in the early 2000s with an exchange in Palau of people understanding community needs and thinking about this to have a community decide how it wants to care for that place. So it doesn't usually align with the research season or sometimes even the funding timeframe.
In terms of the experience in Alaska, often what's needed is just more information and more data about the changes that are taking place. And people in communities are very, very interested, excited about providing that data. But it also presents a couple of really difficult problems, especially when that data is used in the context of sort of an exchange between a community and the state or federal government in particular. And those challenges are first and foremost that as a federal agency, just talking about USGS in particular, the agency that I work for, we have so many rules and standards and approaches that have been laid out in, you know, various documents, reports, whatever it might be, for how you collect those data, that it's often difficult for us to get past that and understand and appreciate the contribution that's made when you go out and you make observations, when you measure things in places where we just don't have that information to begin with. So trying to overcome that is a huge part of what needs to be done. In our case in Alaska, what we're doing right now is pursuing ways that we can create a essentially a framework for people to provide those observations so it can be fed into the work that we as scientists and decision makers do every day. That's just one step, but it's one of many that are needed. Another issue here to confront, and it's even more difficult, is simply the issue of fairness. That, yeah, people are really interested and willing to go out and make observations, again, to help us all understand how the world is changing. But at the same time, you think about it, I'm paying graduate students to go out and make these measurements. USGS is paying people to go out and make measurements. And then are we just expecting community members to go out and do that on their own? Well, in some cases, that's just not fair, but we don't have mechanisms in place to address that. I can't write a check to somebody on behalf of the federal government and say, here is, money so that you can gas up your snow machine and go take these measurements that we all need. So addressing some fundamental questions like that, it's really something that I think we as a federal agency, and I would say our partners, need to think about and concentrate on moving forward.
I want to thank you both for bringing up the challenges associated with funding cycles and funding requirements and how that impinges true cooperative research. And I also want to thank you for saying specifically the speed of trust, because that is an entire concept which rules our reality. But one last point I would like to make on these lines about co-management is the role of the university as an honest broker of information and science. The folks that work at the university are not managers. We're also not emergency responders. And it's important sometimes that we do stay in our lane. When it comes to actually making management decisions, scientists are there to provide the data and guidance as well as recommendations. We are not the decision makers, and we need to move forward in science knowing that we are there to be the honest broker of information, not the forcer per se.
Thank you. Brad, was there a question on that side?
Do we have a question on this side of the room?
Thanks to the panel. Sorry to everybody, the guy always asking questions. But the panel started off with a great question, and I want to touch back on it. In my own journey in thinking about how we get towards solutions, but not just solutions, how do we incorporate diverse perspective in those solutions? Something I realized is that, so touching on that first question, also what Kawika said, and so stemming out of the Enlightenment period when Europe was trying to get away from superstition and come down to empirical data to influence society's beliefs. And then how that evolved into the goals of coming down to reduce to the most fundamental scale so that we can say that this thing is the cause or the correlate. So reductionism in science became very popular, and we're living still in the repercussions of that. And not that that's bad, but I think that's what Kawika was saying, that a certain portion of science was elevated above the rest. Whereas Indigenous is, now that we have knowledge, how do we incorporate that into our society and how we behave? So there's this little chasm, it's a big chasm between reductionist science and holistic science. I'm not saying that holistic is holistic, but that's the value, right? My question to you folks is, can you guys, even if it's just brainstorming, what does it look like to create a venue where both approaches to science comes to a venue saying, I need what you have. So holding equal value for what each other does to reincorporate it. The reason being is that what I realize is when it comes to climate adaptation on a global scale, you have to reincorporate reductionist science into a social system, a political system, an economic system. So I know that's a loaded, reductionist, holistic. How does the venue come together?
I'll jump in on that one. So yeah, I think that there's an awful lot going on there, but yeah, I think it really does speak to the challenges and issues related to climate adaptation. That if we're going to do the work that's needed to help communities adapt, to increase resilience and all of these things, we need both an approach to these systems that is very much holistic. And we also need to be thinking about and listening to the people who live and work in these places. And so the combination of sort of tools that we have available to us right now that we can bring to the table, it's things like co-production or different varieties of user-inspired or involved science as the basis of what we do. And then always thinking about the end uses of the data and information that we're creating as really what's driving the science rather than just doing the science for the sake of doing it itself. So I think that those are things that we very much have available. The catch in going back to your idea about the development of Western science and all these things that we have right now is that the way that federal science and even more so in the academy, they're not set up to reward or develop the science in those ways. That funding cycles and availability of money in particular are out of sync with or just completely removed from those approaches to science. And again, going back to where I started with this, is often an impediment to us providing the science or the data and information that are needed in the context of climate adaptation and increasing resilience.
What I really took away from your question was the word venue. And this is a beginning venue. We are meeting each other for the first time today. So before I even start talking with my partners about questions, we meet and get to know each other 3 or 4 times. And then we get to work slowly. Again, back down to the speed of trust. So I applaud the PI-CASC and University of Hawaii for bringing us all here together so that we can share these perspectives this week. And I really look forward to the next time when the chairs are arranged in a circle and we can start talking about the specific problems that we need help with. And those honest conversations are what needs the venue, so to speak. And we were talking earlier this morning about a similar concept, like how do we bring community members, scientists, decision makers from governmental agencies and tribal organizations and tribes together to develop these questions and answers and really, dive into co-production together. And we don't have that answer yet. It's not a simple answer. This is step 1. And PI-CASC did a great job bringing us all together. But that's one of what the CASC is, a group. It's not a venue, it's a group that's also looking for that venue. The Alaska CASC, the entire CASC network. And there are a couple of others, the NOAA RESAs and the USDA climate hubs. But let's talk about how awesome the CASCs are. But describing that specific venue is hard. But I look forward to exploring it with you.
I want to add a little bit to this in a place where I've been nudging on this dialogue. And that's where we think of the venue and we think of the community and their knowledge of their place. And I introduced myself as talking about my ahupua'a, where I'm from, and I didn't get, where exactly that is in that place that I know that well. But there's this moku level as well. There's this district level as well. And there's this island level as well. And the people are also connected at those levels. I'm not sure if this might get a little wonky. Hang in there for me, but hang in there with me. But we might go to Ha'ena or Ka'upulehu and that community there. But in thinking about our policies and thinking about the agency decision potentially to focus there, that might have happened up at what might be considered a moku level or a mokupuni level. And at what point have we engaged the connection of network of those community people up at whatever their moku level might be or their mokupuni level, et cetera. And so we're getting better at coming down and asking about, like, well, what fish do you fish? How do you fish? What's important to you here, right? And then, but there's also, they're part of another community that might actually be thinking at another level that your agency's division or department leadership might also be thinking about. How is there a place there too that we can, that our communities can have that support and that network within their structure? I'm going to pause there because that probably is, I really want to leave that there for us to marinate with for a little while. It might not have made a whole lot of sense, but that's something that I've been just, sort of nudging on. We ask, and so I might be using some Hawaiian terms, so I apologize, down in the community about what limu you might harvest or what fish you might harvest. But there are a set of our community members that are thinking about Kanaloa as a whole. And Kanaloa being that ocean expanse, and I love that you use the word deity, so I'm going to bring it in, superstition, because I'm going to bring that into the deity of Kanaloa, which is all of the ecosystem mechanisms of the ocean realm. There's a body of our community that is thinking science at that level too, that our community is connected with. So how do we think of that as part of the venue too for those dialogues? Anyway, so sorry.
Thank you for those thoughts. Let me just take the conversation. I loved actually your comments, both Ulalia and Jessica. I think thinking about venues for conversation and discussion and first steps in the speed of trust. And then I love this concept of, sort of starting small and then backing up at these different levels. And so that gets me kind of circling back to watershed management and what the PI-CASC collaboration is all about is do you see opportunities for sharing and learning across the Pacific? And I would actually invite any of the speakers, Tracy or Jason or Rick, I think Thomas left, to also feel free to answer that question. What are we learning from each other? What more can we learn from each other at one of those levels, way up?
I'll just jump in real quickly here with a reflection from this week thus far. I have so much more to learn from all of you. I don't leave till Saturday, so keep it coming. But one of the things I've learned this week thus far is we're using all the same words and they mean very different things. And I work a lot with coastal erosion issues, Arctic river dynamics, and groundwater hydrology. And all of it is like driven by ice. And in terms of the water, you don't get in it, like ever. And so, but like water is the key to life in Alaska. Water always wins. It's our primary transportation network, but it, like, just hearing the conversations about all the different issues using the exact same words, meaning completely different things, means to me that we have a lot to learn from each other and a lot of learning to do together.
I'll just echo that, and I think we have a long history of working together. Alaska and Hawaii doing science together, Native peoples thinking about their resources, migrations, and so there definitely is a great lot that we can learn from each other. Exchanges, coming and learning together or exchanging, like well, you guys have been doing and will do, especially when you go out to He'eia. No better way. I love hearing about the examples there where we're looking at using the same methodologies in places and seeing if there's some similar questions that we're asking and what we can learn together. And I think the other opportunity, I wasn't here yesterday, but I heard about a really fantastic youth panel. But those experiences for building connections and understanding similarities for our youth, engaging them early as we share and listen and learn from each other, internships, fellowships, all of those types of exchanges. My experience has been there are existing ones between Hawaii and Alaska. And that just helps our youth have that connection, helps them have connection to place. It helps us move along on that spectrum of trust. So yep, I think we've got a great history. And so like my Olelo No'eau said, who would deny that great path that came from those that were before us and the lessons that they've shared.
Just a little bit more putting on my hat as a scientist and thinking about how we can improve the work that we can do. We can become better scientists through this sort of exchange. And I see that in two ways. There's the sort of easy way that can happen, just learning from each other on how we do the work of science. I think that was illustrated really well in some of the projects that you saw in this last little bit of the session, where each group is learning from the other, particularly learning how to sort of customize or rejigger the work that they're doing to better meet the needs of the stakeholders. But basic things like also learning about field techniques and things like that. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to learn from one another. But then there's the harder stuff and the things that are maybe a little more difficult to put your finger on. And that's in what we can take from one another in terms of an understanding of how our science fits into the community and into the cultural context in a larger way. For me, an example of that is I remember doing some work out and interacting with people in Dutch Harbor on Alaska, where I showed earlier, and talking to people that are part of the Kalungan tribe, and them trying to explain to me how there's this connection between the language that you use to describe the food that you eat, and the Kalungan people as a people. And without the words, without the food, then they would say that the people cease to exist. And that was a really difficult concept for me to wrap my head around. But when I came to Hawaii and we did tours of these watersheds, we walked through these watersheds, we talked with people who live and work there and heard the same concepts stated in just a little different way, it started to click for me. And I think that sort of understanding of where we are, I think that can be a really important part of the exchange that we can have between the Pacific Islands and Alaska. And it's no less valuable, probably even more valuable than what we can exchange as scientists and more of a traditional Western approach to things.
Hello. Let's see, we've got a challenging question from online. How do you envision adaptation strategies for the next 20 or 30 years? Good luck.
Getting better data to the modeling community so that we can attempt to make higher quality decisions about our future.
I go in a little different direction here, and that for this time frame that you're talking about here, I think we absolutely have to move from the idea of adaptation strategies to implementation of adaptation actions, and finding ways to get past the basically the hangups that we give ourselves because we don't have enough data, or there's not enough money available to do this or that, whatever it may be. Getting past those things and actually starting to do something, I think that's going to be a key piece. That is critical for that time frame that you're talking about in particular.
I'll just add and bring Kawika back in the room with some words that he said. Islands are in the front. We're islands. That's one of the things that brought us together at this gathering. It's one of the things that we've talked about. And islands are on the front lines of the need for climate adaptation, and at the same time, they have a long history of adaptation. And Kawika used the words about indigenous superabundance. And so I think there's something for us to dig into and understand from communities that have been isolated and have needed to be resilient and have thought about and made decisions about how they prepare themselves for change, and how they prepare themselves for catastrophic events. And what is that indigenous superabundance, and why did it happen in the way that it did, and how did it happen in the way that it did? And maybe that's something else that we can bring into what does the future of adaptation, climate adaptation look like?
Yeah, that's it just reminds me of there's many efforts among some of the tribes in Southeast Alaska to bring back some of those indigenous knowledge systems, and talking about abundance, you know, in response to paralytic shellfish poisoning, which is becoming more and more of a problem along the US West Coast and in many places. You know, a lot of the communities are just going forward and rebuilding their traditional clam gardens because they can control the sort of environment in those clam gardens. And they're saying, you know what, we're not getting permission from the state. We're just doing it. It's great. I'm like, go for it. I think there was another question on the other side.
Thank you. Given the runaway train that we're on here and facing sixth extinction, essentially, a lot of these hurdles, certainly here in Hawaii, are perceptions, and the media plays a big role in that. And I just feel like, you know, every time, you know, you look at the local news or whatever, there's something that's causing division. And I feel like whether it be the Nature Conservancy or UH or whatever, we need PR. We need people who are local, who can speak the language, who can bridge the gaps and stop all this division, because it's killing us. That's all.
That was a statement, but I'll not necessarily, but yes, yes. And certainly I think communication is one piece out there. I think there's a values component to this, and I go back to youth, and I go back to our island values, and how do we instill those earlier and throughout our community, and how do we support each other with those values. I have a lot of hope when I look at my friends' children. I'm also looking at their grandchildren, and the experiences that they're giving them and the way that they're learning. So I have hope that there's a portion of this that's going on. I'm looking at some of you in here that deliver programs and work with youth, but you're right. And because Kawika's, you know, not here, one thing that he mentioned that I don't know how we get back to, right? There's a lot of division, and there's there's been a long history of every time people have engaged with each other, it's meant a trade-off. It's meant that you're compromising and giving something up. And that makes things really hard, and it's really hard to come back from that. But how do we come back to that mindset? And I'll have an answer, but this is noodling on this, that we lead with acting in the best interest of the lands and waters, and recognizing that when we act in the best interest of the lands and the waters, we are acting in our best interest as well, and to move to that space. But yes, I see it, don't have the answer, but I think the communications and narrative is one, education is another, values.
I think we actually need to wrap up, so I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the panel. If you have any final words, I'll let you say them. Otherwise, we are going to take a break until 2:40, at which point we begin the Sea Level Rise Adaptation Science session. So thank you very much, Mahalo.
I do have final words.
You have a final word.
Yeah,
Jessica always has a
yeah.
final word.
Oh yeah, yeah, I always do. Don't walk away from here and like not call the person you met, and pick up the phone and call them. Don't just text them or email them. Like, you know, my challenge to every person here is to follow up with one new person you met here, because otherwise we're not going to have the second meeting. We won't have the venue to continue the discussions. Just one person. All right. Thank you.